welcome to another episode of Bikinis and Boarding School. I am your host, Jill Humphrey, and today we are going to talk a little bit about fitness, specifically my training philosophy. So, for those of you that don't know, I am the women's posing and nutrition coach for Team Special Forces. I work with a wonderful team of ladies as well as some of the men on our team, and I get to put together their training programs and help them meet their fitness and nutrition goals. So the team is rapidly growing and expanding. I have the opportunity to work with so many great individuals. Every single one of them inspires me and challenges me. Not a single program is the same. So it's truly a custom tailored approach for each individual. And yeah, I've had some questions coming up lately as the team's expanding, and I just thought that I'd put together a little video and have all of this information in one place so I can share it with you and you can kind of understand a little more about the why behind a lot of the programming and the things that I do. So I am an IFBB Bikini Pro. I have been competing in the sport of bodybuilding since 2005. Although I kind of like to look at it as having two separate careers in bodybuilding. So the 2005 to 2010 era, and then I took a decade off and came back in 2020. So things have changed a lot from the first decade of competing to where they are now, both with the way that I train and the way that I eat. So we're just going to throw all the stuff from that first era out the window and talk more about how things are now and where my mindset and philosophy is now after really dedicating myself 4 years solid to growing my physique, specifically the glutes, because I am in the bikini division. So I think a lot of us are questing for the same thing, to build more glutes. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about programming. So the most important thing that I think that any athlete can grasp is that there is no off season. There is no time to be off. It's not like you just shift into this mindset of I'm going to prep and then you just throw all these habits and behaviors out the window once your show is done. So even when your improvement season is relatively long by the standards of the sport, they're actually really, really short. So a lot of our athletes are wrapping up their competitive season. Maybe they finished in September or October. We have a couple athletes that have their final show the first weekend in November and will be going into their improvement season. Now, for those of you that are prepping for spring shows or planning spring shows next year, your prep is most likely going to start in January. So if your improvement season is truly this fall, that really just leaves a few months before you're right back into prep. So for myself and for a lot of our athletes that compete in the summer and the fall, we do take a little bit longer improvement season. We tend to stay away from those spring shows and then come back in the summer after we've been able to dedicate a solid 6 months to improving the physique and making the changes that you really need to bring to stage. So my training philosophy, a lot of it honestly is because I am a master's athlete and I have a history of back issues. So training around impingements, being mindful of my joints is really important to me because it's great when you can go into the gym and train hard, but if you're not recovered and you're in chronic pain, it's really going to negatively impact your ability to get back in there and train again. So I'm all about minimizing the amount of spinal compression that we do. So I don't do a lot of spinal compression, lower body movements. Always focus on form. I do not believe in ego lifting. I don't care how much weight is on the bar, as long as it's challenging to you and that you can perform it with proper form. I'm all about going with lighter weights and making light weights feel heavy. So if you're not feeling a specific movement, skip it. There's absolutely no reason to continue to perform a movement that you're feeling in the wrong area, that you're not trying to train. So for example, when it comes to glutes, if your low back is feeling it, if your hamstrings are feeling it, and it's supposed to be a glute isolation, you're either going to need to find a way to correct the movement pattern to create the stimulus where you want to feel it, or find a different movement pattern that works best for you. So we all have different limb lengths. We all have different makeups and structures. So what one person might feel great as a glute movement, the other person might not feel at all. Maybe they're quad dominant and the quads are taking over. So little side tip for the quads taking over, specifically in glute drive. One little hack that I have used in the past and still use from time to time is to pre-exhaust the quads with a really light burnout set of a seated leg extension, and then go into your glute drive or your hip thrust. Because the quads are pre-exhausted, they're less likely to want to take over, meaning that you're able to keep that more of a glute isolated movement. So just an awesome tip when it comes to glute drive. So as far as skipping movements that you're not feeling, this requires a little bit of lifting IQ to really dissect what's going on here. So is it that the movement is new, it's uncomfortable and it's challenging, and you need to improve at this movement, meaning start at a lighter weight, work on your form, and then gradually increase it? Or is this movement really not good for you based on your limb length or maybe some physical impingement that you might have that's preventing you from performing this movement? So you do have to be honest with yourself and say, is it just that I hate this and I'm not very good at it and I'm trying to avoid something that's uncomfortable or difficult? Or is this really a move that's not good for me? Just because you see someone doing it on Instagram or on one of the videos that you've watched about training just doesn't mean that it's the right move for you. I think back a couple of years and there were all of these really cool exercises that I was seeing online for glutes. Some of them were possibly effective, some not so much. A lot of them were just downright weird, but fun because they did encourage me to try new things in the gym. But at the end of the day, I really do strip it down to the basics. And while I have quite a variety of movements in my program, at the end of the day, a lot of them really are just the same thing performed on a different piece of equipment with a slightly different angle, loaded in a different way, but it's really just the same thing. So a lot of my programming is bilateral and unilateral work. I believe that both have their place. But most of us, by the time we're masters athletes, are dealing with some sort of impingement, a little bit of a weakness on one side, maybe former surgery or joint issues. So having this nice balance is important. We don't want to keep it all unilateral work because bilateral work really has an important place in our structure programming as well. But the unilateral work is really interesting because it is going to start to highlight some weaknesses and imbalances. So for your unilateral movements, I always recommend starting on your weak side and let that establish the rep range that you're going to perform on your strong side. If you're starting with your strong side, you might be able to crank out 12 reps. Then you get to your weak side and maybe you get to that 10th rep and you just can't do anymore. Now you've just reinforced that imbalance by adding a couple more reps to your already strong side. So start with that weak side, establish your rep range with that, and then match it with your dominant side. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my training split and specifically my rule of every third day. So a lot of people want to have that 7-day-a-week structure where every Monday is glutes, every Tuesday is back, every Wednesday is glutes, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, your body does not know what day of the week it is. Your muscles do not know what day of the week it is. The important thing for training is that you want to have enough time to recover before training again. So as long as you're recovering and you feel like you can hit that muscle group again, it's time to hit it again. For me, this is usually every third day. So I would have 2 solid days rest and then hit glutes, 2 solid days rest, hit glutes again. During those 2 days, maybe I have an upper body programmed in, maybe I have some cardio and core work, or maybe I have an active rest day programmed in. It's just important that I'm focusing on the recovery, which in my case means eating enough protein, getting enough sleep, and staying hydrated, as well as keeping up on foam rolling and stretching and some of the things that I do to help assist me with recovery. Movements that aren't traditional glute building movements. I have learned to really feel those. So the way that I train is a combination of mind muscle connection and mind muscle obedience. You hear the term mind muscle connection a lot, and most of us think that we understand that. But I found that just because you can mentally connect with a muscle does not mean that that muscle is activated, turned on, or that it's doing what you want it to do. So I can connect with the glute and understand that I'm training the glute, but it might not be doing what I want it to do. In other words, maybe I'm only feeling 75% glute activation, and then 25% is transitioned into my low back or my quads or something that I'm not trying to train. So, this mind muscle obedience takes a little more focus and concentration to not only tune into that muscle and connect with it, but actually get it to perform the way that you want it to perform. So, you can actually find movements that are not traditional glute movements. And with this mind muscle obedience, transition the load to the glute and make that work the way that you want it to. A really good example of this for me has been the seated leg press. Most people aren't going to program in a seated leg press and call it a glute dominant movement. But the way that I do my seated leg press, both unilateral and bilateral, I feel it almost an exclusive glute movement. The way that I'm able to push my low back against the pad, tuck my pelvis under a little bit, and load the movement, I totally feel it in the glute. And I think it's really because of that combo of mind muscle connection and mind muscle obedience. And at the end of the day, when you think of that movement, it's actually very similar to a step up. So just another way to perform it on a different piece of equipment. And for people that do have knee injuries, this can be a much more stable lower body focused movement that is unilateral as well. So I also want to touch on the importance of body work. So I'm not talking about just a nice relaxation massage. I'm talking about functional body work that actually gets in there and deals with the fascia, with the soft tissue, releasing anything that's tight, and someone that really knows how to work on someone that's a bodybuilder who's lifting on a regular basis, who knows how different muscle groups impact your ability to lift. Now, I do understand that body work is very pricey and not always in the budget, might not always fit into our schedule as well. So there are some things that you can do at home. And even if you're doing regular body work, it's really important to do this home care as well. So one of the things is foam rolling. We joke in our house and call our foam roller as an additional piece of furniture because we do spend a lot of time on it. So I recommend spending 10 to 15 minutes minimum per day just doing some foam rolling. There's some other pieces of foam kind of equipment that you can use for back mobility, stretching, and posture. I have one that I use for my neck and then another for my mid back, and I really like both of those as well. Another awesome tool to use for muscle release, and I find that this is kind of the home equivalent of that deep tissue bodywork style massage, and that is actually just a lacrosse ball. So you're going to lean up against the wall and roll the muscle into it, leaning up against it, and really lean into it until you're feeling like you almost can't handle it anymore. So it's kind of painful, but it's that good kind of pain. And then you just kind of roll back and forth once you find that knot, and you'll actually really be able to get some things to loosen up by doing that. Works really good on the upper outer glutes, works amazing on the hip flexors, and again through the low back as well. You can also do Epsom salt baths. I probably do 2 or 3 of these a week, and just being able to soak and relax, take some of the strain off of the muscles, and feels so good. So in the improvement season, it is so important to train hard, sleep hard so we can recover hard and get back and do another heavy session to help us achieve our goals. I will say that it's really important to nail your nutrition during the improvement season. There is a detrimental impact of not taking in enough protein and not taking in enough calories during your improvement season. I know that post-show, sometimes the focus can shift and we're not as hyperfixated on our nutrition goals as we were when we were in contest prep. but they are just as important, if not more important, during our improvement season. So my natural way of eating is honestly to skip meals, to forget about food, and probably underconsume. I've definitely changed that over the last 4 years that I've been consistently bodybuilding. I've put on enough muscle and gotten in the habit of eating on a regular basis. So I get pretty hungry if I skip a meal now, but that wasn't always the case. And I'm sure at some point when I'm done with my bodybuilding career, I'll probably go back to eating a little bit less than I do now. It's actually a little bit of a chore sometimes trying to get in as much food as you need to, but it is so important to your repair, your muscles, and to fuel the gains and the goals that you're trying to achieve. I will say that one of the things I help the ladies on our team navigate is advocating for blood work. Doctors don't always want to run the labs, so advocating for blood work and then just establishing a baseline for where our hormones are and where our thyroid is, just to see if there's anything that we might need to be doing to correct those. Because if things are out of whack on the inside, it doesn't matter how good your nutrition is or how hard you're training, you're really not going to be seeing the results that you want to see. So I am a huge advocate for working with naturopathic professionals for bioidentical hormone replacement and for peptide therapy. So at the end of the day, it really does take patience and time to see the results that you want. You do have to take the first step and just start showing up for yourself. That sounds so simple, but it is so difficult for so many people. So for those of you who are already putting fitness as a priority, I applaud you. Stick with it. I know that you're not going to see the changes when you look in the mirror every single day, but those habits, those disciplines, and those behaviors to continue to show up for yourself day in and day out, you absolutely will see these changes. So don't be too hard on yourself if you haven't seen the progress right away. Analyze some of what you're doing and make sure that you're actually giving it your all when you're in the gym. I have this little saying that I like to remind myself: leave a piece of your soul under the bar. I mean, you want to feel like those workouts just sucked a piece of life out of you, because where you tear down those muscles, they rebuild stronger. So get in there, train hard, practice progressive overload, challenge yourself a little more every time, but don't be so hyper fixated on the weight that you're putting on the bar. Focus on how you're feeling it, where you're feeling it, make sure that you're recovering too. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode about training. At the end of the day, it takes time and patience to see results. You have to take the first step and start showing up for yourself. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. For more information about joining Team Special Forces and working with me, check the show notes below and reach out. I would love to work with you.